I need to check if my baby is okay, I screamed as the HOA president tipped my stroller onto the grass, with my 6-month-old daughter still strapped inside. Emma was wailing in terror, while this woman in her designer pantsuit stood there smugly lecturing me about noise violations. What Victoria Thompson didn't realize in that moment, she'd just physically assaulted the baby of the new CEO of Elite Community Management, the company that owned her precious Lakeview estates. I'd been working undercover for 3 weeks, but right then, watching my daughter cry, I decided, tomorrow, Victoria would learn exactly who she'd been harassing. I'm Sophia Chen, and 3 weeks ago, I moved into Lakeview Estates with my husband David and our 6-month-old daughter Emma. The lakeside community looked perfect on paper, beautiful homes, pristine landscaping, and amazing amenities. But beneath that polished exterior lurked Victoria Thompson, HOA president for the past decade, ruling with an iron fist and a clipboard full of violations. As the newly appointed CEO of Elite Community Management, I'd heard complaints about our properties, especially Lakeview. The board suggested I fire management and restructure, but I wanted to see firsthand how residents were being treated. My plan: live anonymously for 2 months, document everything, then make informed changes. Little did I know Gerald would make my job so easy by targeting my family immediately. It started with a simple walk around the lake with Emma's stroller, and ended with a confrontation that would change Lakeview Estates forever. The first official warning came just 2 days after we moved in. A neon orange notice stuck to our door. Violation: unauthorized recreational equipment visible from street. The equipment was Emma's stroller, which David had left on our front porch while bringing in groceries. "This has to be a joke," David said, examining the notice. It was there for maybe 20 minutes. I took a photo from my growing documentation file. Apparently, that's 20 minutes too long in Gerald's kingdom. The next morning, while having coffee on our patio, I spotted Victoria making her rounds, tablet in hand, meticulously documenting infractions. She was tall and thin, with perfectly pressed designer slacks and a polo shirt embroidered with the Lakeview Estates logo. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in an immaculate bob, and she wore oversized sunglasses that hid her eyes as she scrutinized each property. When she noticed me watching, she changed direction and approached our house. "Mrs. Chen, good morning," she said with practiced pleasantness. "I trust you've received the notice about your violation?" "Yes, about the stroller," I replied. "It seems a bit excessive for something that was temporarily on the porch." Victoria's smile remained, but her voice cooled. "Rules maintain our property values, Mrs. Chen. That's why Lakeview is the premier community in this county. Perhaps in your previous neighborhood such laxity was permitted." The way he emphasized previous neighborhood made it clear he was making assumptions about where we'd come from. I'd anticipated encountering problems, but not the thinly veiled prejudice in his tone. Before I could respond, Emma started fussing through the baby monitor. "I need to check on my daughter," I said, walking away. "Of course," Victoria called after me. "And please review the complete HOA guidelines. They're quite extensive." Extensive was an understatement. The manual was 87 pages long, with rules governing everything from acceptable shades of white paint to permitted flower species. Most concerning were the noise regulations. No audible sounds from children between 2 p.m., 5 p.m., and after 7 p.m., deemed community quiet hours. The next week brought 2 more violations, one for excessive water usage because David had washed his car in the driveway, and another for landscaping alteration after I planted a small herb garden in our backyard. But it was my afternoon walks with Emma that really seemed to trigger Victoria. Her stroller had a slightly squeaky wheel, hardly noticeable to most people, but apparently deeply offensive to Victoria's sensitive ears. "Another complaint about the noise from your baby carriage," she said, intercepting us during our walk. Two other board members flanked her, a woman named Patricia who looked uncomfortable, and a younger man who seemed to be Victoria's protege. "It's just a normal stroller, Victoria," I replied. "All strollers make some noise." "Not in Lakeview. They don't," she countered. Section 4.31 clearly states that all recreational equipment must operate noiselessly in common areas. "You're classifying my baby's stroller as recreational equipment?" Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "Victoria, I think the rules apply to everyone, Patricia." Victoria cut her off. "No exceptions, not even for new residents still adjusting to community standards." That evening I reached out to other homeowners. The Martinez family had been fined for speaking Spanish too loudly on their patio. The Williamsons, an elderly couple, received weekly violations for their bird feeder. Single mom Aisha Jackson was being harassed about her children playing in her own backyard. A pattern emerged. Victoria targeted specific residents, minorities, families with children and single parents, while ignoring identical violations from her friends and allies. 2 days later, I discovered Victoria had implemented a stroller permit requirement without board approval. The application fee, $250, renewable annually. "This is getting ridiculous," David said that evening. "Maybe it's time to reveal who you really are." "Not yet," I replied, reviewing my documentation. "I need to see how far she'll go. The board needs to understand this isn't just one disgruntled resident." My opportunity came the following Sunday. I was pushing Emma around the lake when her stroller hit a crack in the sidewalk, making a noticeable squeak. Victoria, who had been speaking with her supporters nearby, spun around like she'd heard a gunshot. "Mrs. Chen," she shouted, marching toward us. "That's the final straw. Your constant violations show complete disregard for this community." A small crowd began gathering, sensing the confrontation brewing. Victoria's face had turned an alarming shade of red as she pointed at my stroller. "That contraption has been causing noise pollution for weeks despite multiple warnings," she announced to the onlookers. "This illustrates exactly why we need stronger enforcement of our rules." Emma began crying, startled by her loud voice. "And now," Victoria continued, gesturing dramatically, "noise disturbance affecting peaceful enjoyment of the common areas. This is exactly what we've been discussing at our board meetings." I clutched the stroller handle tighter. "She's a baby, Victoria. Babies sometimes cry. Not in our common areas during designated quiet hours, they don't," she replied, reaching for her phone to document yet another violation. I had nearly all the evidence I needed. Just how far would Victoria Thompson go? "This ends now," Victoria declared, her voice carrying across the lakefront. She stepped forward, grabbed the handlebar of my stroller, and yanked it from my grip. "What are you doing?" I shouted, lunging for Emma. Thankfully, I'd secured her safety harness, so she remained strapped in despite Victoria's aggressive handling. The crowd gasped as Victoria wheeled my daughter toward the grassy common area, Emma wailing in fear and confusion. "Victoria, stop!" Patricia called out. "You can't do this!" She ignored her, pushing the stroller onto the lawn before dramatically tipping it sideways, sending it crashing onto the grass with my terrified 6-month-old still inside. I ran to Emma, heart pounding in my chest, and unfastened her from the toppled stroller. She was physically unhurt, but screaming in terror. Several neighbors had their phones out, recording everything. "There," Victoria announced, hands on her hips. "Noise violation equipment confiscated from common areas, as per Section 5.2.7 of our bylaws." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Emma's sobs as I held her against my chest. "You just assaulted a baby," Aisha Jackson said, stepping forward from the crowd. "Someone should call the police," Victoria scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. I simply enforced community regulations." Patricia and several other residents approached me, offering help and expressing shock. Even some of Victoria's usual supporters looked uncomfortable with what they'd just witnessed. "Are you and Emma okay?" Patricia asked quietly. I nodded, still soothing my daughter. "We're fine. But this has gone far enough." Victoria was already walking away, calling over her shoulder. "The stroller will be held at the community office. You can reclaim it after paying the appropriate fines." That evening, I made 2 phone calls, one to Elite Community Management's board chairman explaining what had happened, and another to our company's legal counsel. "We've seen enough," the chairman said. "How soon can you implement changes?" "Tomorrow morning," I replied. "It's time Gerald Thompson learns who he's really been dealing with." David looked at me concerned. "Are you sure you want to handle this yourself, after what she did to Emma?" I brushed my fingers over our daughter's sleeping face. "I'm not just doing this for us. This is for the Martinez family, for Aisha's kids, for everyone who's been bullied by a woman who thinks rules only apply to people she doesn't approve of." The next day, I dressed in my CEO attire, the suit I hadn't worn since going undercover. Today, Victoria Thompson would discover exactly who she'd been harassing. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the Lakeview Estates clubhouse. By 6:30, the room was already packed. Word had spread quickly about the stroller incident. I arrived at 6:45, dressed in my executive suit, pushing Emma in a brand new stroller that I'd deliberately not oiled, letting it squeak with every movement. David followed behind with a briefcase containing all my documentation. Several residents nodded or smiled as we entered, while others looked confused by my formal attire. At exactly 7 p.m., Victoria entered with her board members. She frowned when she spotted my family in the front row. "Mrs. Chen, I see you've acquired a new noise-making device," she said, gesturing to the stroller. "I hope you filed the proper permit application." I smiled politely. "I'll address that shortly, Mrs. Thompson." Victoria tapped her microphone and called the meeting to order. "Before we discuss agenda items, I want to address yesterday's incident that some residents have exaggerated on social media. As HOA president, I have full authority to remove unauthorized equipment from common areas." "Point of order," I interrupted, standing up. "I'd like to request speaking time before the general." "Agenda," Victoria's eyes narrowed. "That's not how our meetings work, Mrs. Chen. Resident concerns are addressed during open forum at the end, if time permits." Patricia leaned over and whispered something to Victoria, who waved her off impatiently. "Actually," I said, walking to the front of the room, "I believe the CEO of Elite Community Management has speaking privileges at any time, according to your own bylaws, Section 1.3. The room fell silent. Victoria's face registered confusion, then disbelief. "What are you talking about? Richard Stevens is the CEO and he's—" "Richard Stevens retired 3 months ago," I replied, placing my company ID and business card on the table. "I'm Sophia Chen, the new CEO of Elite Community Management, which owns and manages Lakeview Estates and 14 other communities in this region." Gasps and murmurs erupted around the room. Victoria stared at my credentials, her face draining of color. "That's impossible," she stammered. "I know Richard personally. He would have—" "The board decided to make changes quietly," I continued, nodding to David, who began distributing folders to each board member. "After years of complaints about mismanagement across our properties, they hired me to evaluate operations firsthand before implementing reforms." I turned to address the residents directly. "For those who don't know, I've been living here undercover for 3 weeks, experiencing how this HOA treats its residents. Yesterday, Mrs. Thompson physically grabbed my baby stroller with my daughter inside and threw it onto the ground, all because of a squeaky wheel." Victoria's shock transformed into anger. "This is preposterous. You've been lying to everyone, infiltrating our community under false pretenses." "Actually, Victoria," Patricia interjected. If she's really the CEO, she has every right to inspect the properties her company manages. I nodded. These folders contain evidence of systematic discrimination in rule enforcement, financial irregularities in HOA fee allocation, and unauthorized rule changes implemented without proper board approval or resident notification. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, showing a graph of violation notices by household demographic. In the past year, families with children received 340% more violations than households without children. Minority homeowners received 290% more violations than white homeowners of similar property types. Single parents received 210% more violations than couples. Victoria attempted to regain control. This is a gross misrepresentation of, it's all documented, I interrupted, clicking to the next slide showing bank records, including the $37,000 from the Community Improvement Fund that was diverted to renovate the clubhouse kitchen, a project that mysteriously went to your sister's interior design company without competitive bidding. The room erupted in angry shouts. Victoria banged her gavel frantically. You have no authority to... I have every authority, I stated firmly. Elite Community Management appointed you as HOA President, and we can remove you just as easily. In fact, that's exactly what I'm doing. I turned to face the crowd. Effective immediately, Victoria Thompson is removed as HOA President and banned from serving on any board in our communities. All recent violation notices will be reviewed and all outstanding fines are suspended pending investigation. Applause broke out across the room. Victoria's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. You can't do this, she shouted above the noise. I've maintained property values in this community for 10 years. I've kept the undesirables out. Her words died as she realized what she'd admitted in front of dozens of witnesses. Patricia and the other board members physically distanced themselves from her. Mrs. Thompson, I said quietly into the microphone, would you care to clarify what you mean by undesirables? The room had gone deathly silent. Victoria grabbed her designer handbag and headed for the door, but stopped when she reached me. You've made a serious mistake, she hissed. My friends on the elite board will hear about this. I smiled. They already have. In fact, they've reviewed the same documentation I just shared, including video of you assaulting my daughter. They fully support these changes. As Victoria stormed out, Emma's stroller wheels squeaked loudly in the silence. A few people laughed, breaking the tension. Now, I said, addressing the remaining board members and residents, let's talk about creating a community that works for everyone, not just a select few. Over the next hour, we outlined immediate changes. A simplified rulebook reducing 87 pages to 12. A new violation review process requiring 2 board members to approve any notice, and a community committee with diverse representation to oversee future rule changes. As the meeting concluded, residents lined up to share their experiences, stories that had been silenced for years under Victoria's regime. The Martinez family described being told to speak American at their own barbecue. The Williamsons recounted $500 in bird feeder fines. Aisha Jackson showed documentation of weekly noise violations for her children playing in their fenced backyard. Patricia approached me as people were leaving. I should have done more to stop her, she said quietly. I knew what was happening wasn't right. It's not too late to help fix things, I replied. This community needs leadership that cares about people, not just property values. Outside in the parking lot, we found Victoria placing a violation notice on my car windshield, her final futile act of defiance. 3 months later, Lakeview Estates had transformed. The community center, once reserved for Victoria's inner circle, now hosted playgroups, cultural celebrations, and senior activities. The once empty park filled with children playing, residents walking dogs, and families enjoying picnics without fear of arbitrary fines. Victoria sold her house within weeks, unable to live in a community where she couldn't control everyone. Rumor had it she moved to a strict retirement village, where she quickly wore out her welcome by attempting to form an unauthorized residence committee. I continued living in Lakeview part-time, splitting my week between our home and corporate headquarters. We kept Emma's squeaky stroller as a reminder that sometimes the smallest sounds can trigger the biggest changes. Patricia was elected the new HOA president, focusing on building community rather than enforcing rules. Her first official act was establishing a good neighbor policy, replacing the punitive violation system. The most satisfying outcome wasn't the dramatic removal of a tyrant, but watching the community heal and connect. The Martinez family now hosts monthly potlucks celebrating diverse cuisines. The Williamsons' bird feeder attracted photography enthusiasts who formed a nature club. Aisha's children organized a neighborhood kids soccer league. Sometimes the most important lesson is the simplest. A community isn't built on perfect lawns or matching mailboxes. It's created through respect, inclusivity, and the understanding that different doesn't mean wrong.